Hi, just before you watch this recording, we'd like to make you aware of an invitation to participate in some research evaluating the impact of our campaign, which has been approved by an ethics board at Teesside University. The research in this area is really important, so we'd be very grateful if you could take part. All you have to do is complete a short survey before watching the event. You can find the link to that evaluation below this video. Teesside University will then be in touch directly in the future to tell you about future participation. Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome to this Flippin' Pain event where we're paraphrasing Rod Stewart. I wish I knew then what I know now in relation to living with persistent pain. I'm your host, Felicity Thau, and if you've been to any of our previous events, you'll know the format, but because we're in the business of flipping, this one looks a little different. This evening, we'll have presentations and reflections from 5 people who live with persistent pain themselves, followed by a question and answer session, where we'll be also joined by Dr. Chris Barker, a specialist pain GP, Dr. Lizzie Dohert, a pain psychologist, and our very own community pain champion, Professor Cormac Ryan. As ever, we are delighted to be working alongside Teesside University on pain research. As I'm sure you'll agree, we could all benefit from more research in this area, so we're hugely grateful for your participation in this. If you get a chance, in the next couple of minutes, there is a survey link in the question and answer box. So if you wouldn't mind heading to that, filling that in, that would be brilliant. We are hugely grateful to tonight's speakers, Fen, Tim, Georgia, Nikki and Claire, for sharing their experiences and their journeys with us. Let's not understate the challenge of living with persistent pain and the courage required to share that journey with such a large audience. We appreciate that everyone's journey will be different, and we thank you in advance for treating our panel with respect. Please do post your questions to the speakers in the question and answer box that you can see on the screen, the directions to just now. But remember, we can't give any personal or tailored medical advice. And so to the main event. I am delighted to introduce Tim Atkinson, who is an award-winning writer and blogger, and his reflection is that if only I'd known how complex pain can be. Tim, I'll let you take it away. And you'll just need to unmute.
How's that?
Perfect.
Thank you ever so much. That's fantastic. I've been suffering from arthritic pain for over 20 years now, and apparently that makes me something of an expert according to the publicity materials that the Flippin' Pain campaign put out in order to publicise this event. Now, as you know from the intro, I'm interested in words. It's my day job, making words matter. It's what I do. I'm a writer of books, including a forthcoming memoir about life with chronic pain called Where Does It Hurt? So when I saw that I was being called an expert for this event, I thought I'd better make sure I understood what that entailed, be prepared and all that. So I looked at the word itself. Expert can be a noun, which is probably the format we're most familiar with, somebody who's very knowledgeable or skillful about a particular area, or it can be an adjective, as in I have been given over the last 20 years plenty of expert medical advice. In addition to that, there are all sorts of similar words, synonyms like specialist or pundit or oracle, maestro, virtuoso, wizard, connoisseur, aficionado, or pro, whiz, hotshot. But none of these really seemed to hit the nail on the head as far as I was concerned. They all seemed far too dynamic for somebody who's been suffering from chronic pain for over 20 years. So I thought I'd better do what I normally do when I'm stuck on a word and take it apart, split it up, see what I can make of it. You split expert up and it splits into ex and pert, quite obviously. And pert, according to the dictionary, means perky or energetic, even saucy or cocky or assured. And I'm sure even over the internet on a live event like this, I don't look like any of those to you. I certainly don't feel perky or energetic, to say nothing of saucy or self-assured. But if you put X before any of those, that's more like it. I think some of you are ahead of me. X perky, X energetic, X saucy, X cocky. That's more like it. I can certainly own up to being an expert in that regard. But am I also an expert when it comes to pain? I mean, do you actually need to be an expert in pain? Surely not, because pain is simple, right? Wrong. We all know how wrong that is. But the myth persists. The common sense notion that if you hurt, it's because you've done some damage and you need to rest and let it repair, and after that the pain will go, is popular for a reason. You stick your hand in the fire and the sudden agony certainly ensures that you take it out again damn quick. But chronic pain isn't like that. And I wish I'd known that all those years ago. Chronic pain isn't necessarily a sign that something's wrong. And I wish I'd known that too. I wish I'd known that thinking about pain is actually something that can be more harmful. And it can stop you doing the kind of things that you need to do in order to stay healthy. For example, I now know that painkillers that I was given as part of the problem can make things better, make things worse, I should say, and that there are far better ways and safer ways and more effective ways than that. And I know too that some of the many things that I try instead of the painkillers sometimes work and sometimes don't. And it's important simply to keep going and to keep doing something, whatever that is, because pain is anything but as simple as it might first seem. And how you feel can very seriously affect how painful things are. In 1995, the British Medical Journal reported on the case of a 29-year-old builder who had been taken to hospital with a 6-inch nail sticking out of his foot, and he was in agony. He was given fentanyl on arrival at A&E, and only when he was sufficiently sedated and calm was the nail-pierced boot removed. And then when they removed the boot and examined him, they found that the nail had missed his foot completely. The pain was real enough. It's just that it wasn't caused by any physical injury. There was no injury, apart perhaps from injury to some of the people's feelings. That kind of thing doesn't even just happen to humans. The racehorse Henbit, which was trained by Dohert and written by Willie Carson, won the 1980 Epsom Derby by 3/4 of a length and completed the fastest course time since the legendary Nijinsky in 1970. And it was only afterwards, when the horse was examined, that it was discovered that he'd run the race despite running on a hairline fracture. The adrenaline and the excitement of the race, the moment or the zone, as athletes call it, clearly works for animals too. And top athletes use pain as an essential part of their training program. They employ what scientists describe as cognitive coping strategies to keep on training long after most of us would have given up in agony. Because it's, in the end, how they think of their pain and how they talk to themselves about it that affects how bad or how good it feels. And I wish I'd known that 20 years ago. The psychologist Catherine Hartley did a study in 2017 in which she gave mild electric shocks to volunteers who were playing a computer game. And the volunteers were split into 2 groups, and they were both given shocks when the item on the game didn't proceed through the maze to the end. But only one of the 2 groups could actually control the movement of the dot. And yes, the same mild electric shock hurt the second group far more than it hurt the first group. just being able to do something, however small, made a measurable difference to how much pain they felt. Perhaps the weirdest thing I ever did in the research for the book was to talk to a group of people who actually enjoy pain. They really, really get off on it. They're members of a BDSM group, and they get their kicks or slaps from whips and canes. Now, the morality of other people's sexual behaviour isn't something that I'm going to talk about today. And as far as I'm concerned, what people do in the privacy of their own homes and with informed consent is their own business. But in talking to them, and that's all I did to them, I can assure you, I began to know something that was similar to the kind of things that I'd noticed when I was talking to top athletes. These pain aficionados had a lot in common. And what it boiled down to was agency, was control, was the way they thought about their own pain. It might not look as if you're in control when you're being spanked by somebody else, but if you yell banana or whatever your safe word is, it's game over. Yes, these people loved pain, but their brains loved control. And it was that agency, however small, that seemed to make the difference between pain and pleasure, or in this case, pain as pleasure. But there are no safe words for us, are there, for the chronic pain sufferers? There are plenty of swear words, maybe, and we perhaps shouldn't be afraid to use them, because they may help. Not only that, but there appears to be a dose response. The more profane the oath, the better the pain relief. If you say a mild, I don't know, golly gosh, it doesn't really help much at all. But go for the full whatever, insert word as appropriate, and it works wonders. Student volunteers recruited by Richard Stevens of the University of Kiel managed to keep their hands immersed in an ice bucket for almost 50% longer when they were allowed to swear. Stevens measured their heart rate too, and something called their galvanic skin response, which basically means perspiration levels and an indicator of stress or fear or arousal. And the results of these additional tests also showed that swearing made a measurable difference to the volunteers' pain responses. Their bodily perception of pain was lower. In other words, they really did experience less pain whilst swearing. And I wish I'd known that a lot earlier too. So many things have an influence of pain. I've learnt an awful lot about it in the last 20 years. And so perhaps, maybe going back to the beginning, I am a bit of an expert after all. At least I'm beginning to feel a little less expert, because after all this I've discovered one simple truth about my pain and how I can manage it, and it boils down to this: it's not what you do, it's just doing something that matters, taking control, having the equivalent of a safe word in your life. Some experts recommend pacing or exercise or yoga, mindfulness, CBT, etc. I advocate doing any one of them, and doing it just because doing something, almost anything, I think can make a big difference. It stops you being a victim. It prevents a passive mindset, and it helps you take control of a situation that can otherwise seem out of control, and it can make you just feel that little bit better. And that's science, people. Trust me, I'm an expert, apparently.
Thank you very much, Tim. That's brilliant. Thank you. Now, we are going to head next to our next speaker. We've got Fen with us. So Fen describes herself as a former pain victim, suffocating beneath a cocktail of opioids, injections, infusions, and intrusions. She now considers herself a pain survivor and helps advocate to improve every survivor's well-being. Welcome to the event, Fed. Over to you to share your thoughts on the lesson, If Only I'd Known That I'm Not Alone. Just checking you can hear me, Fen. And if not, no worries. We will go on to our next speaker, Nikki. So to introduce Nikki Jones was diagnosed with severe neurological facial pain 18 years ago. And in 2018, she flipped her understanding and management of pain. And tonight she's sharing what may be the hardest lesson of them all. If only I'd known that there might not be a magic cure.
Hi, thanks, Felicity, that's great. Hello everybody, my name is Nikki Jones. I'm an old friend of pain since the fall from a horse when I was 16 caused chronic back pain, and then I developed severe trigeminal neuralgia, which is a rare form of facial pain, when I was 31. I am now 49. They say you should tell your story because it may become a page in someone else's survival guide. This whole presentation feels somewhat self-indulgent to me, and in some way like, what is life without vulnerability, without being open and telling your story? Especially when asked, well, what if telling my story could have been a page in my own survival guide? What if I found a time travel pod? What would I have told myself back in early '03 when that horrific pain didn't go away? What would I have said to her, so newly suffering, so badly wounded, so lost? And would I have listened? And would I have listened in all the years following? Slide, please. Before TN, I was active, successful, with a very good job in London. I worked hard, played hard, and enjoyed my life despite wrangling with the back pain. As you can see, horses remained an important part of my life. However, when TN hit, everything changed. The pain was terrifying and often utterly debilitating. At this point, it was like a cattle prod to the side of my face, out of nowhere. Any time, any place, no warning, no grace, and no respite. I was formally diagnosed within a couple of months, which is not many people's experience. And then it all started. Medication, surgery, still pain, disability. Next slide, please. When I was first diagnosed, I was immediately put on the classic drug for this condition, an anticonvulsant called carbamazepine. Yet I reacted very violently to this drug, actually becoming unable to walk from the side effects. I was swapped onto gabapentin. Again, as the dose increased, so did the side effects and disability. The pain became a continuous grind, as well as the sudden shocks out of nowhere. I had very little relief. Other drugs were thrown at me, steroids, Valium. Something will help, they said, something. I was off work sick, of course, and I loved my job. My world was collapsing around my feet. I was alone and frightened, and at this point I was still in London, and my family were back in Wales, and my 2 horses were being cared for by friends. I was just desperate for everything to be normal again. I got advice and sought out a neurosurgeon, and the MRI showed a huge blood vessel compressing the nerve root by the brainstem, and it was quickly agreed I'd have cranial surgery to pad it off. I'd never had surgery before. I was assured that at least 80% of people were pain-free after this surgery, and I was desperate to go back to work and life. Initially, I had a very good response, and my pain levels were much reduced. I tapered quickly off the drugs, but once off them, the pain quickly returned. I returned to live with my parents in Wales, as I'd been made redundant and was struggling. It was nearly a year since it first began. Next slide, please. I was so broken at this point. You can see for yourself, and remember, you don't take many pictures of the bad times. But you can also see I had good times, even if I'm completely wrapped up, as any wind or rain on my face caused huge pain. My horses gave me motivation, focus, a reason to live, for which I'm so grateful, and that I was in the privileged position to keep them, thanks to my parents back in Wales. But I fell into a hole then, back on high doses of a varying array of drugs. I had further surgery, which actually worsened the condition. I did do a pain management course in 2005, but while it gave me some good coping strategies, I was still very focused on finding a cure, not in any way learning to live with the pain. And it seemed like an intolerable level. How could they expect that of anyone? Soon opioids were added to the mix, particularly fentanyl lollipops, far too many of them. Next slide, please. The next few years were surgically focused. I had a third cranial operation on the nerve root, this one leaving me with permanent nerve damage to my face and mouth, but the pain was still there. I eventually had a motor cortex stimulator implanted. As you can see, not a small surgery. Yet the decision, the hope for even a small amount of pain relief seemed easy at the time. Always looking for a biomedical cure. What else did I have? This surgery never gave me much pain reduction. Indeed, I had issues with the wires causing pain every day in the occipital nerve, plus what felt like electrical leakage. I had 2 or 3 revisions, as you can see on the slide. The battery pack was later replaced by a smaller rechargeable one, but it's still unsightly and uncomfortable. I accepted it all. What else did I have? What else did I have? Next slide, please. So I wish I could get into that time pod and visit the then me. What could I say? So I would tell her that the science would progress, and so please don't ignore it. That keeping control over her experience would be the single most helpful thing. That pain didn't have to mean suffering. That medications and surgery were not the answer for her. But first, and most importantly, I would sit with her and I would hold space for the overwhelming loss, for the devastation of dreams, that reeling confusion of fear. Then I would tell her that I knew she was stuck in a dark, deep box, that it was nailed hard down by pain, by her own mind and brain, by the medical system, by life, but that the box didn't have to stay her unwanted home. She could take the nails out and take wing. Maybe pain would fly with her, maybe it wouldn't, but she can leave suffering back in the box where it belongs. I would explain that for now me, freedom from the box was won by a differently directed courage, and by patience, by learning and growth, by commitment. That I had needed to break free from the medication that suppressed me, which allowed me to wake up enough to start to take control of my experience, to let go of the desperation for a cure, and learn that recovery wasn't a cure, a swift completion. It was a long, involved dance, and one that needed my wholehearted participation and even joy. That surgery and medication weren't the answer. I was seeking with the wrong question. That in the end, I was the answer for me. Next slide, please. For the now me, recovery was assisted by a pain management app, which allowed me to access new science that made me realise there was a whole different way of thinking about pain. Within months, my whole pain experience had improved significantly. I started to consider myself on the road to recovery. Although 3 years later, recovery remains very different to how the then me imagined. It is a journey that includes and embraces the history of that pain and the impact it has had on my mind, my body, my world. Would I have heard my older, wiser, unsuffering self? Would I have listened? Was I too frightened to hear? Would I have thought I still knew better? Had the better science been around in 2005 when I did that pain management program, would I have been so struck by it? Was I still too stuck in wanting, needing a cure, a full stop, someone else's responsibility? Why did self-management feel like abandonment then, not the empowerment it does now? The story for so long was that the medications, the stimulation were needed. If the pain was this bad with them, how could it be tolerable without? And I always felt I had nothing else. I was doing all I could. I believed to my bones that pain was largely imposed by biology, that it was immutable, consequential and predetermined, not the adaptable, moldable, responsible, and oh so teachable experience that it is. I used all my courage in the wrong places, the wrong way. When you are hurting, you are in fight or flight, and it goes on, and you lose your agency. You just need to be helped, and the system encourages that. Courage becomes surviving every day. Coping mechanisms become tangled and unhelpful. How would I nurture the growth of belief and hope and determination that soothe the desperation, the suffering, the dependency? Even now it can still get lonely, frightening, too much responsibility. A better understanding of pain gave me a foundation to use courage and curiosity to better effect, reasons for committing to making new neural pathways, new habits, new skills, to dancing my fear away, sitting with discomfort and befriending my body, my brain, my mind, me. I wish I had understood that the drugs were mostly a cosh, that they chained and abused me, even though I never abused them, that the surgeries were hope and being cared for, a chance to cut it all away, but hopeless and damaging in the end for me. I can't talk to the dead me who suffered so I talk to you, and hope that something in my story makes it to the page of your survival guide, because the now me is, well, happy being me. Thank you.
Nikki, thank you. That was brilliant to hear. Thank you. Now I'm going to try Fen. Wouldn't be a 2021 live event without a couple of technical difficulties. So Fen, we mentioned that you describe yourself as a pain survivor. I'm going to hand over to you for the lesson, If Only I'd Known That I'm Not Alone.
Hello everybody, can you hear me?
We can, that's brilliant.
Yay, thank goodness. Hello there, sorry about the technical difficulties, little gremlins in the thing here I think. Good old Lincolnshire. Good afternoon. I hope you're sitting comfortably. That seems such a simple statement, particularly after what we've just heard. But I want to ask you, are you really sitting comfortably? First slide, please. Next slide, please. For most people, especially those with persistent pain and those caring for them, including family and friends, being around a person with persistent pain causes tension, anxiety, worry, and fear. I could guarantee that if I could see you how you are sitting, your posture would show me how tense you are. Next slide, please. So, if you're able to, please sit up straight and slowly drop your shoulders down. You will feel a slight pull across your chest. Keeping your shoulders down, take a deep breath in through your nose, hold it, and if you're able to, slowly turn your head over your right shoulder, only going as far as is comfortable. Then gently blow out that breath. Slowly return your head to the center. Breathe in through your nose, hold. Slowly turn your head over your left shoulder, only going as far as comfortable. Gently blow out that breath and return back to the center. Now relax. You are not alone in feeling tense, especially when you're in a situation that is making you anxious, like now perhaps. Perhaps somebody is telling you that you look so well, you can't be in that much pain. Instead of shouting back that it feels like your whole body is being yanked in 50 different directions while being pierced with thousands of tiny ice-cold needles and simultaneously being burnt with giant red-hot branding irons. Next slide, please. Simply drop your shoulders down, gently breathe in through your nose, feel your diaphragm expand with air, hold for 5 seconds, then slowly and quietly release the breath through slightly pursed lips. You can do this all the time when somebody else is chuntering on, like me. Next slide, please. Before I learned how to be less tense, I would always interrupt to say exactly how I was feeling. I felt I had to justify just how terrible and debilitating the pain was, simply because it couldn't be seen. I'd recite extensive facts of my illness, which meds did what, as well as a long, long, long list of all the things I could no longer do. Next slide, please. In reality, unbeknown to me, I was using all my time and my energy to feed my pain monster, increasing the tension and the anxiety. I did my best to carry on working, hiding the cold turkey come-downs from the fentanyl patches and other horrendous side effects, because I didn't want anybody to think I wasn't capable. Eventually, the opioid dosages were too high, the fatigue and the depression so overwhelming that I had to give up my job and interrupt my studies. Next slide, please. A turnaround happened when I realised how many things reinforced persistent pain. The competitiveness of the pain clinic waiting room, patients comparing medication and how bad their pain was, the negative information on the wall, and the regimented way that we were dealt with by the clinicians, lined up in our hospital gowns, hooked up to monitors, bearing which part of our bodies were going to be injected, infused, probed and poked. Dignity wasn't an issue. They never really engaged with us, except to ask which bit hurt. Next slide, please. We were never asked anything positive about our lifestyles, our interests, or what we wanted to do in the future. They didn't care that I wanted to go back to work. When they asked why their methods made me worse, I was discharged along with 20% of other patients in Lincolnshire who hadn't responded to the medication-led treatments. Funnily enough, this proved inspiring. I searched for answers and found that other health services were looking at a more holistic approach to persistent pain that focused entirely on the individual, but not their illness. Physio and gentle exercise, such as stretching and walking, are really helpful, not harmful. Next slide, please. When I understood my pain, I realised dwelling on negative situations affected my well-being. Almost everything I said and did before was pain-related. I completely lost myself and my identity. It's so easy to fall into that dark, endless pit of pain. In fact, some clinicians prefer you to be that way, numb, dumb, and non-challenging. Here's another pill, see you in 3 months' time. However, the moment you realise that you are not just your pain and that you are entitled to a life lived well, it changes everything. One of the things that I love to do was sing. My own self-pity stopped me singing and pain made me hide away. About 4 years ago, I was on the way to the dentist as the oromorph had made all my gums recede. I heard some really loud singing and I followed the sound and found a strange looking bunch of people dressed in ornate Victorian costumes wearing purple pith helmets. I honestly thought I was dreaming. They were swaying along to the tremendous sound of their collective voices in a public park. Something odd happened to my face. I was actually smiling. They were having so much fun, it was infectious. A few weeks later, I plucked up the courage to join them. Next slide, please. I can honestly say that this amazing group of people changed my life. They were incredibly welcoming, no need to read music or even sing that well. And guess what? A lot of the members have persistent pain, chronic illness, autoimmune disorders, but during a performance you would have no idea. However, if you saw us trying to get up the narrow stairs to the practice room and heard us exchanging our pains and aches for about the first 5 minutes while we got into our chairs, you would honestly think we were in the queue for the euthanasia clinic. Yet minutes later, rehearsing our first song, the endorphins have kicked in. We are completely different people. There is sheer joy on our faces, singing our hearts out. There is laughter galore as quips and gentle leg pulling is exchanged during and between songs. It's absolutely the best therapy in the world. No matter how bad I might be feeling, that precious hour once a week lifts my soul. Despite their own pain, as individuals, they are creative, highly skilled, and have wonderful tales to tell. They are so incredibly interesting that we rarely focus on our various illnesses. However, if needed, the support is always phenomenal, never, ever judgmental. Next slide, please. When you're lost beneath your pain, it's often the fear that holds us back from doing things we used to love doing. It's not about dismissing your pain. It's about starting a new journey to stop pain completely ruling your life. Seeking support is not a weakness. It's a demonstration of how fantastically strong you really are. Just be totally honest with those you trust. Unfortunately, you do find out rather quickly who your real friends are, but then it's their loss, not yours. Keep your focus on those who understand, who ask you how they can help, but more importantly, what you can do to help them understand. It's a two-way street, especially with healthcare teams. Next slide, please. One simple thing can entirely change how you feel and how you go forward in life. It's finding the courage to go ahead. I know if you're in a bad, sad, and really dark place now with your pain, you'll think I'm talking hippie, drippy rubbish, and previously I would have agreed with you. But I challenge you to focus on one thing you used to love to do and how good that made you feel. By this weekend, try and find a way to start doing something you love, no matter how small or simple it might be. Next slide, please. You are not alone. Please don't lose hope. And remember, you are more important than your pain. Enjoy your journey towards a better way of living, but please take it one step at a time. And don't forget those breathing exercises. All the best, everyone. Take care of yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Fed. Thanks so much for sharing. We'll keep you on the phone there for our questions and answers later. But next up, we have Georgia. So we're delighted to have Georgia here this evening. Georgia has lived with pain for 7 years, but it has inspired her to study occupational therapy in order to help support others in the same position. Over to you, Georgia, for If Only I'd Known That Pain and Damage Aren't the Same.
Oh, I'm hoping I've unmuted myself. I think I have. I'm not very good with technology. So hi, my name is Georgia, and as Felicity said, I've been living with chronic pain for 7 years. And I just want to talk a little bit about how my pain inspired my own journey into occupational therapy, but B, also how hurt doesn't always equal harm. So my pain journey began in 2014. I had some surgery that was quite complex, but wasn't thinking much of it, and had some sort of post-chronic pain afterwards, which I attributed to just operative pain that would hopefully go away. I had a few scans done, mostly because I was very worried about what was going on. And the scans showed that I had some arthritis, which as a young 24-year-old, you really don't expect. And actually at the time I was 17. And it also showed arthritis was in the ankle, whereas a lot of my pain was based in the sole of the foot. And so that in itself was a discovery that I was quite shocked about. And as the time went on and the years went on, I later discovered I had some nerve pain, but scans also came back as clear. So I was very puzzled and curious to find out what was going on. And I think I had an over-reliance on scans, especially in the early years. And something that I've learnt along the way is that scans don't necessarily reflect on the level of pain that you're experiencing. Now, the pain that I was having affected me mentally, psychologically, physically. I was very withdrawn. I wasn't going out to places. And I felt like I couldn't move my body because I was scared I'd hurt it. And that, for me, is one of the most powerful messages that I hope to get across, is that moving is not harmful. And in actual fact, moving can be helpful for you. And it was only really until I'd learnt more about the protective mechanism of pain and how it's supposed to be a protective factor rather than harmful, then I began to realise that there were ways that I could help myself with my pain. And I think a lot of the literature that I read initially was around how pain is to do with structural damage, tissue damage, and in my case, some of it was, but a lot of it wasn't. I think reflecting back on those early years when I was so influenced by the scans and what the doctors were telling me, you know, they were all saying, oh, we're not sure if you'll, you know, be able to recover from this. You might have this for a very long time. And that, to me, as a young adult, was quite detrimental. And I think I followed my own path eventually into trying to find a way of managing my pain. And as Felicity mentioned, my pain journey did inspire me to train up to become an occupational therapist. Just to note, I'm waiting for registration. And it was really those sort of early days that inspired my drive to get the message across that pain isn't always harmful and hurt doesn't always mean harm. I think a lot of literature is around the fact that it's tissue damage, whereas I think, especially in pain management groups, it's not always mentioned that it can also be about an oversensitised nervous system rather than solely tissue damage. And I think for me, the underlying message is that pain is quite complex. And I think if you focus purely on the fact that it could mean harm, you're taking away all the other aspects of it that are so important to rectify and to look at. I think one of the biggest things for me is around labels, and particularly if you're diagnosed with something and someone sticks a label in the front of it that says mild or moderate or severe. And I think sometimes we can be quite entranced by that and we think, oh, well, my pain must not be that bad because it's mild. Whereas in actuality, it can be quite bad. And I think it's important to be realistic about that sort of stuff. But I think labels are not as important as how the pain makes you feel. And I think going to, you know, your meetings with consultants or doctors, I think it's really important to, whilst acknowledging that label, thinking about how your pain affects you. And I think for me, as I've gone on and grown a bit older and been a bit wiser, I've learnt that a lot of my pain is nervous system related. It's almost like a car alarm that's going off continuously because my brain has learnt that. And in order for that to stop or at least reduce, I need to desensitise my nervous system. I think in actuality, the scans don't always picture the truth. I think the over-reliance on scans can be quite damaging, I think, but they have their time and they have their place. For me, I think it almost became a self-fulfilling prophecy because I wasn't moving around and I wasn't doing anything. I was withdrawing from friends and family. I actually quit going to the gym, which is something I used to love doing, because I was so scared that I'd do more damage. And it was only really until I'd had the interaction with the physios and my GP and pain management that I learned that actually movement could be really helpful in trying to reduce some of that pain and actually making you feel good about yourself too. I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give is not to rely too much on Dr. Google, which is something I definitely did when I was younger, just because some of the advice on there can be quite conflicting and may not relate to you and your pain. I think it's important to remember that your pain is individual, and this is something that I lost sight of, particularly when I was chasing all these scans and MRIs and things like that. But it is your pain and it will affect you and your life, and I think it's important to be an advocate for yourself. And the last thing is just to not to be over-reliant on scans, because they have their time and their place. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Claire. So Claire Robinson, last but by no means least, she is a yoga lover in her 30th year of living with pain, who considers herself almost recovered, with the final message, if only I'd known that recovery is possible.
Hi, I'm Claire. Thank you so much for listening to us all today. So as Felicity said, I'm here to talk about recovery. And that's quite a big word, and it's got different meanings for different people. So recovery for me means total recovery. That means no pain. And again, these are big words, but it's something which is reality, and it has been for me. As Felicity said, this is a 30-year journey. I'm not fully recovered. I think it's important to say that, which is why recovery means different things. But I do aim to be fully recovered, and I have eliminated most of the pain that I had for a long time, at least 10 years, if not more, where there was no improvement in that pain. So my pain specifically was sciatica and back pain. So it was mainly lower back, lots of pain in my glutes, and the sciatica, of course, which goes down your leg. Mine sometimes would be in both legs as well. And a lot of the time, if I had a really bad day, I couldn't actually walk. And I would need crutches. And that's, it wasn't even that long ago, really, in the last 10 years that this was still happening. So I've made huge steps really in recovering. So first of all, if only I'd have known now, back then, what I know now, in a nutshell, everything. And I mean, that's huge to say that, but it's absolutely true. So I've picked out a few key things which I think are really important in helping me recover from my kind of pain. So if somebody would have said to me back then that the internet would have helped me, I wouldn't have believed them. Back in the day when my pain started, I was a teenager. The internet didn't exist. It was that long ago. It didn't exist publicly like it does today anyway. But when it did come along and I started using it, that was the thing that it came into its own for me. So many people don't like social media, but it's just that the search facility and being able to put in chronic pain and the results you get. Yes, it's very overwhelming, but if you keep researching, you might find some nuggets like I did. Luckily, you don't have to research because the information is out here now in places like Flipping Pain, which is fantastic. So I think for me, the possibility that I could have recovered if I would have been told that back then, that would have spurred me on probably even more. But I still had that motivation to get well because I was having scans, I was seeing GPs and consultants, and being told there's nothing wrong. So when you have the most excruciating pain 24/7 and you're being told there's nothing wrong with you, that's what spurred me on to say, well, if there's nothing wrong, I'll prove it. And I'm quite stubborn, and I think that's contributed to my relentless research and trying to work out what was wrong. So if I could have been told back then, in the early days of my pain, you could get well, there is a chance that you could recover. I mean, of course, this is not for everybody. It's just reality. It will not be for everybody, but there is a chance for some people that they will be able to recover. I just don't believe that I would have still been sat here 30 years later if I would have been told that right at the beginning. There's no guarantee, of course, but I don't believe that. I think I would have made big steps back then. So the second thing, that takes me on to the second thing, which was when I started to try and look for what was wrong. I was chasing a physical cause. There had to be a physical cause. My body hurt. It had to be a limb. There had to be something that was wrong somewhere, and it had to be physical. So I worked it out the other day. I think I spent 14 years looking for a physical abnormality, however you want to call it. But I didn't necessarily find one. I think the physical body is really interesting, and I think that could actually be the topic of another webinar another time, because I did find that I had created some unnatural movements. So we're not going to go into detail about what that means and what happened, but I have spent time correcting my unnatural movements, which I believe helped me. So again, it's a bit of a very unique thing. What helped me may not help somebody else. I think it's important to look at it that way. But I believed with me, I've developed some physical habits which were unnatural and did contribute towards the levels of pain I was having. So I worked on correcting these. Now, nobody diagnosed me with this. Nobody noticed this in me. It was just me that did this. But it wasn't just the physical body, because I was still getting pain in the form of flare-ups, and they were severe, absolutely severe, just catastrophic. I couldn't walk, even with crutches. So this brings me next on to the brain, and I've written it down here on my piece of paper, the brain, exclamation mark, that I found my brain 4 years ago. The way in which I found my brain was neural pathways. Nikki mentioned this earlier. If you don't know what these are, look them up. Neural pathways, neuroplasticity. I'd come across the words neuroplasticity in a couple of resources that I'd found online, some websites about pain, and I hadn't really given it that much notice. So when I came across it, would have been about 2 years ago. It was somebody that I'd been following who runs a private pain management course, a paid for course. I decided to do it, and that's where we dug deeper into neuroplasticity, what it means, neural pathways, which are the signals between the central nervous system and the brain, and how that can influence pain. What I'd also done a couple of years before that, actually, was CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. And that's how I then made the correlation between that and what I learned on the pain course. It was like, aha, this is the same thing. So when I had CBT, this taught me to look at things like my thoughts. So habits, we've all got habits. We all get up in the morning and have the same routine. That's a habit. Thought patterns are enormous. Behaviors, again, are behaviors. We have thoughts and behaviors that we've had since children, and we bring these into adulthood, and it becomes habit. It becomes our default. It becomes our normal. we're probably not even aware of half of this stuff. And until you start digging into it, and the CBT really helped me do that. I had CBT through the pain clinic, my local pain clinic. I also self-referred for another course of it, which was sort of normal CBT, but that helped me in my kind of life thoughts, behaviours, patterns, not just related to the pain habits and thought patterns and behaviours. So for me, these things are really keen because that's what drives the neural pathways, but that's where you can undo them as well. It's not permanent. And in learning how you can start to undo those and think differently and change your behaviours, that could impact your pain really, really positively. And it could even take some of your pain away or reduce it like it has with me. And I think finally as well, one thing, when I went back, we were talking about the physical aspects of things. What I didn't say was I learned to fully relax. That sounds really stupid, but when you have pain, the sort of pain that I've had is a sort of muscular pain. Your muscles can tense up because your body's trying to protect yourself. So your body tenses up. And I was tense all the time. I was even tense when I slept. I couldn't believe that when I found it out. But again, nobody told me this. Nobody diagnosed it. I saw physios, I had massages. Nobody diagnosed it because it was a feeling in my body. People could look at me and say, well, you look normal. But guess what? I was tense. I was holding my muscles. They were tense all the time. So when I learned breathing techniques, I do a lot of yoga, so I'd learned breathing techniques. But when I was on my pain course, we had to do a 30-day breathing course and meditation course every day for 30 days. And I suddenly realised how tense I was in my body. And even now, even today, I still have to clock in with myself and say, am I really relaxed? Tense the back muscles, feel them in the floor, and then breathe into them. Breathing is amazing. Fen mentioned it as well. Learning how to breathe, the different types of breath you can do, and meditations. There's loads out there for free. If I'd have known all this at the beginning of my journey and I could have started these processes, I wouldn't have spent the first 10 years completely incapacitated. I didn't have a life. I did work, but those first 10 years were very, very hard. So I think for me, that's the main things that when I thought about this could be helpful for people. Everything matters when it comes to pain, but for me, the type of muscular pain that I had, if I would have known all this at the beginning, things would be very, very different today. I think I'm going to end on something that I think is quite important as well to say is there was no resources when I started my pain journey. There was nobody, there was nothing. I didn't even know anybody with chronic pain. So people that are watching this now, if you go to the Flippin' Pain website, you'll see the resources. And yeah, there's a lot on there. And yeah, they might be really overwhelming, but it's there. I had nothing at all. And the stuff that's on here is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And it really can work for you. So please take this seriously. Please think yourselves lucky that you have this information available to you. I would have given anything for this 30 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claire. As you say, a 30-year journey. We're pleased to have you on the other side of it. So before we move on to our panel question and answers with all of our speakers and 3 professionals, I'm going to allow our professionals to introduce themselves. So first up, we have our pain psychologist, Dr. Lizzie Dohert. Lizzie, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. Hi there. So my name is Dr. Lizzie Dohert, and I work as a clinical psychologist with people with persistent pain. Working both individually and in group pain management programs. And I'm also the psychology lead for the Lincolnshire Pain Service, which is run through Connect Health.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Lizzie. Next up, we also have Dr. Chris Barker, who is a pain specialist GP.
Hi there, everyone. It's really great to be here. Thanks to Connect and the Flippin' Pain team for putting this together, and thanks also for just being inspired by the people we've listened to tonight. It's been incredible. I guess my role really is as a pain GP. I have a confession to make. I haven't GP'd for a little while now, so I predominantly just do pain, and I work in a pain clinic in Southport, which is about 10 miles north of Liverpool. And I'm the clinical lead for that service, and because I'm a little bit greedy, I'm also working in another pain service as well in Wirral, and I'm actually involved in that and kind of the transformation work around that service. My main real interest is in helping people tap into their resources that they have, and it's, as I said before, it's inspiring to hear how people have done that and how people continue to do that at different points on their journey. As a pain doctor, I guess often, we get involved in making diagnoses, and we get involved in the medicalised kinds of treatments. And I think what we've heard tonight, and also what we know from the evidence, is actually the medicalised, or the evidence that we have behind medicalised treatments, is probably not as good as what we thought it was. And this is why it's really, really good to hear how people have been able to start their own recovery themselves. And so that's my main interest, really, is kind of reaching into other people's bags and seeing kind of what they have in their toolbox for managing pain. So yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Spot on. Thanks very much, Chris. And finally, on our panel, we have Professor Cormac Ryan, who you will all know, I'm sure, as our community pain champion. Cormac, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Felicity. Hi there, my name is Cormac Ryan. I'm Professor of Clinical Rehabilitation at Teesside University. I'm also the Community Pain Champion for the Flippin' Pain campaign. It's great to be here on a night where we've heard such powerful and empowering stories, and it's great to be a part of it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. So, as we've said, do put any of your questions in the question and answer box. There's a thumbs up function as well, so if you see a question you like, give it a thumbs up so we know that they're popular. I think the #1 most popular question so far is going straight to Nikki. And I must caveat this with, we said that there is no magic cure when it comes to pain, but people are very keen to know what app it was that you used to help you flip your understanding of pain. And what I'll ask is, because we know there is no magic cure, what was it about that app that was really helpful?
The app I used was Curable. Other apps are available. But the main thing for me was that the app sort of introduced me to that science had changed. That was the main thing it did. So it had that education component. And I then went on YouTube and found Lorimer Moseley, who made a very big impression on me with his sort of, talking about pain and neuroplasticity and everything. So it was flipping my understanding of pain that was sort of the foundation. But the app gave me the how, it gave me the structure, it gave me something sitting in my hand that I could do every day. It introduced me to meditation, which 3 years later is still a very big part of my life. It has a lightning bolt function that you can use when you need to hit it for when you're in pain or something. Visualizations, everything. But it was a complete structure. It was a complete pain program, but in my pocket with me all the time, and it just gave me a feeling of a safety net. So even though I was doing this myself unsupported, I still had something there engaging me, encouraging me.
Spot on. Thank you very much, Nikki. We've had two questions that I think I'd like to tie together, and then probably come to you, Claire, first, just based on the journey that you discussed. Kirsty is a nurse, and she's saying, why is it so hard to consolidate what I know as a healthcare professional, what I understand about all of this, and use it effectively while simultaneously being a person with persistent pain? And then Susie asks, she understands the messages that we're delivering and has that knowledge, but how do you stop the brain being so protective? And I accept it's probably not we tell you that hurt doesn't mean harm, and you thanks so much, brilliant, sorted. It will take time. Was there a process of that for you, first of all, Claire?
That's a really interesting question. I wouldn't say there was a process. It's so sort of individual, isn't it, for people? And I think hopefully by the things that I said, it's kind of like finding your own way and finding what works for you. Like Nikki just said as well, that visualization is everything. Well, actually, it's not for me. I find it really hard to do visualization. So for me, I think there's like that left and right brain thing as well, to determine what type of, whether you're a left brain or right brain sort of person. So it was once I understood the knowledge, the thing about the neural pathways and how that all works. It's like, okay. I think a lot of it for me it's like calming my system down, and it's talking to your subconscious brain. We all talk to ourselves. That's your subconscious brain. So if you sort of see that as a separate person, like I do, and I talk to it and I reassure it and I tell it things like, I'm safe, I'm okay, there's no need for you to flare, because I'm being totally indifferent. It's there, but I acknowledge it. I don't accept it. I acknowledge it. It's there. It's like, yeah, you're there. Okay, that's fine. When it shows its head, and then I just carry on with things. So it's finding those strategies and techniques and tools that you then have to practice. It's repetition and it's practice. And when I talked about habits, that's what you do. You've sort of unconsciously made a habit. You now have to consciously make another habit, a new habit that undoes that one that you've already made. And it's not like it'll take 3 weeks, it'll take 6 months. You've got to practice it and make it part of your daily life. I hope that kind of helps a little bit.
Absolutely, makes sense. It's not a quick fix, it's a process. And I will come to Lizzie as a psychologist. So Lizzie, you're in the business of helping people with these kind of thoughts and these kind of behaviour pattern. Can I ask the same scenario to you?
Yeah, sure. I was just thinking that it's so important to tie in the two real elements that have come across to me from all the brilliant stories today. Have been Nikki's really resonated with me, this idea of holding a space to acknowledge the loss. So I think being able to hold a space to acknowledge the loss, but then alongside that, deciding what you want to do, because everyone's been talking about what they really value, what they want to be doing more of as a way of actually living their life. And I think that's really the key thing, is to acknowledge what might be coming up. As Claire was just saying, some of the thoughts that might be coming up, but then actually making a decision to treat yourself kindly within that, but move towards what you want to be doing, and carrying your pain with you, or carrying the difficult thoughts and feelings that might be there with you as you head towards what you want your life to be about. So really that's the key part of the work that we're trying to do within our service, and within pain psychology in particular, is help people find ways of acknowledging that distress and still doing what they want to be doing in manageable ways, carrying it with them. And I think once people start to do that and start to notice that makes a difference, they're then motivated to keep doing it. And as was said previously, build up that habit of doing that.
Yeah, spot on. I think, that was a powerful message, holding space for that loss. It's not just the sensation of pain that is the problem, it's everything that comes along with it, as Nikki and everyone else has described. I want to come to, I had noticed a question actually about that there's been a couple of people inquiring about, talked to me about neural pathways and things we've mentioned. What I will direct you to, if you're thinking, this sounds interesting, but I'm not sure what you're talking about, we have done previous webinars where Cormac, our pain researcher, has described that. So if you head to our website at www.flipandpain.co.uk, you'll be able to look at our previous events and rewatch those, because it forms a big part of this puzzle piece. Really interesting question that I saw from an anonymous person. Apologies that I don't know your name, but it wasn't how do I manage my pain. I'm going to come to you on this one, Chris. How do I manage my GP? And I think we could all appreciate when it comes to complex things like persistent pain, particularly in 2021, it's really difficult to share this stuff with your GP, or to feel like, you know, you have some consistency of a rapport with them. Do you have any tips for managing a GP?
It's a great question. I think when I was a GP, I think, yeah, I struggled with how do I manage my co-GPs. I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? I think really what comes across to me is the power that we can bring as people into a consultation, how we can influence our general practitioner by the things that we bring. And I think there's a lot of resource out there on the internet, particularly as we know on the Flipping Pain website. But I think, you know, there was a really interesting study that was published. It's years ago now, probably it was in about 97, and it was in Australia, and it showed really the power of people bringing information into general practice, and they actually influenced how their GPs kind of managed problems, and it showed really that that we can influence that, and if we educate our GPs, that can change how they manage stuff. I think that's obviously done in the right way, isn't it? And I think it depends on what kind of GP you have. And I think I being completely honest about it, I think, you know, there's many GPs out there who are fantastic and they're really open to things. There's some GPs, like in every walk of life, that there are people who really maybe aren't so open to stuff like that. I'm a real advocate for people surrounding themselves with a team of people that will help. And if you find yourself a GP that will really help, then fantastic. If you haven't got a GP that is particularly helpful in that way, maybe, you know, have a go at kind of having that discussion openly and honestly with them. And if nothing changes, then it may be time to kind of see if there's anybody else around. But I think really it's about that transaction. I think if you come in with, you know, with kind of small bits about what you want to focus on yourself, a little bit of evidence from what you've read on the internet, those kind of things can go a long way about firing up discussion, meaningful discussion in a consultation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. I want to ask some of our speakers the same question. You're the people who've been to your GPs with persistent pain. Ben, who we have on the phone, have you had any experience with GPs that you find would be useful to share with others? I'll just give you a minute, Fen, just to see if we can unmute. If not, I'll go to Georgia and we can come back to you. Georgia, you're someone who lives with persistent pain, but is also training to be a healthcare professional. So you've got that you know, that good stuff of sitting in both camps. Are you happy to share your experience?
Yes, so I have different experiences with GPs. I've had some absolutely wonderful experiences and some tricky experiences, shall we say. The ones that have really gone well are ways in which that I've brought things like pain management diary, so tracking what I'm doing every day, not necessarily everything, but things like, you know, if it hurts when I'm getting out of bed, if it hurts if I'm in the shower, triggers, if you like, keeping track of those and bringing that to the GP and saying, this is what I'm doing every day. How can we, you know, try and figure this out? I think another thing as well for me is medication. I'm on quite a few bits of medication, and keeping track of those and side effects, because I can find, particularly for me, side effects previously were quite a big barrier, where that's something that I've managed to kind of get past. I think the main thing for me is keeping a pain diary, being really open and honest with them and not hiding anything back. I know when I was younger, I was quite hesitant to be open because I thought, oh, they might think I'm telling porcupines. But in actuality, I think being open and honest with them about my pain and also about how it makes me feel, if it makes me feel low in mood or anxious or worried or, withdrawn, I think it's really important to have those elements in the consultations with GPs, because at the end of the day, we're all human, we're all individual. And I think that all of those things need to be mentioned, really.
Absolutely. Apologies, I'm just battling with a mute button there. I would. But no, thanks very much, Georgia. Fen, are you able to hear me, and do you have any experience you want to share within kind of seeking healthcare professional advice?
Hello.
Hi, Fen, we've got you.
Everybody's waking up.
Can you hear me, Fen? I can hear you, so I just want to check if you can hear me. Nope, don't worry, we will come back to you for another question. A really interesting point raised by Janice, which I think is something we hear a lot as healthcare professionals working in persistent pain. Janice really hates it when she has a flare up of pain. People say, "Well, what did you do to do it? What was the trigger?" Because it's associated with an aspect of blame. I guess let's go first of all to Lizzie as a pain psychologist as to what can that. First of all, do you see a lot of people who have these feelings of like I've done something wrong and therefore there is this feeling of blame? And then let me come to some of the speakers to share some of your experiences.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really, really common thing. And I think that question came, or those responses came in response to someone asking what kinds of things are really unhelpful for us as healthcare professionals to say. And I think I always try and have conversations with people which are around being curious and wanting to understand something. So if there have been changes, it's helping explore together and noticing, were there any differences? Was there anything that might have triggered it? So I think it's very easy for people to feel that sense of blame for things. And I think as healthcare professionals, we really need to be mindful of that when we're talking to people. And it's something that I think is carried with people and opens out to how they might be feeling about themselves, how they might be worried that family members might be thinking about them. So I think it's really important information when someone does, if you're able to share something like that and say, this feels really quite blaming, it can be a really powerful way of opening up a conversation. But I think it was mentioned earlier on, I definitely see the real benefit in working in persistent pain in this way is working on it as a team. So trying to talk to people and helping to get them to be curious about what's going on for them, with the joint goal of trying to find something that might be able to help them in managing their pain. So I think it's really important for us to think about the impact of what we're saying for patients who may have spent a lot of time often feeling really quite negatively about themselves.
Absolutely. I want to bring Nikki in on this because Nikki, you talked about your opioid experience and subsequent coming off those opioids. Now, where did blame feature in that journey, and would you be happy to share some of those feelings? Are you there, Nikki? It may be that you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes, brilliant.
Yeah. I had a unique experience, almost, it seems to me, in pain, that I never felt blamed or shamed about my pain. I always felt taken very seriously, and almost too seriously, because then it drove me down that biomedical surgical route very strongly. But when I started to come off the fentanyl, because I had a very sort of swift reduction in my pain, I came off the fentanyl very quickly. I was completely unsupported. I did it all myself in my own way, so I did it too fast, and the GP changed another drug at the same time, which was a bit sort of catastrophic. But at that point, I just got enrolled in sort of, it was just really difficult experience. It was actually more gnarly than the whole pain experience for me, because I just felt that nobody took me seriously as soon as there was any emotional component to my issues. As soon as the dreaded mental health came in, I was dismissed, and a psychologist basically told me that I didn't feel what I felt, which actually sort of set it in harder. So it's been a really hard experience, but it's taught me a lot, and I've ended up in a good place, and I'm definitely stronger for it. So I would say that it's taught me to really strongly use self-compassion. That self-compassion is the sort of foundation for everything, and that applies to pain as well as, you know, my other struggles, and how the way you treat yourself and how you talk. Claire talked about talking to your brain. I use safety talk to my brain all the time, and it's the same emotionally and so it's brilliant, and it's taught me that, so I'll never regret it because of that. You're on mute now.
Thank you very much. There's always one. Georgia, I also want to come to you from the perspective of a young person. You were a teenager with persistent pain. Do you want to share your experience? And I think I may have passed on the mute baton. Yes, there we go.
I think I did it. Yeah, so I was 17 when I was diagnosed, and lots of people were saying, oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. There was lots of sort of professionals saying, oh, you know, you're young, it might be because you're doing X, Y, Z. And actually, I remember someone saying to me, you know, maybe if you stopped going out clubbing, your pain might reduce. Well, in actuality, I wasn't going out clubbing at all because I couldn't. But that really sort of resonated with me, because I was thinking, why are they blaming it all on things that I'm doing as a young adult or not doing as a young adult? And I think definitely as I've got older, I've learnt almost to try and separate myself from those sorts of things. So, you know, thinking about my pain in itself and in its own entirety, rather than perhaps what I'm doing. I suppose that's it's a bit tricky to explain, but I suppose what I'm trying to say is that you can't really blame someone for doing things they want to do, even if they are experiencing flare-ups in pain, because particularly even now I do experience flare-ups in pain. But I try to avoid blaming myself, and particularly when I go to the GP and say, oh, you know, this activity really makes my pain flare up, I try and put it across in a way that helps them to understand I'm not blaming myself for it, because I think the moment you start blaming yourself, you just start catastrophizing and it gets worse and worse and worse. But it's that sort of clubbing example of being blamed for my pain because I was going out clubbing when I wasn't. That is in itself an experience that will always stay with me, because it's almost quite funny how it's almost like stereotyping, isn't it, of young adults with chronic pain.
Absolutely. And as you say, it's the assumptions, but also you would have had every right to go out and be clubbing. And the number one thing we've all, the message we're saying is, do the things you love doing. Pain steals those things from us. The things that we love are the most important things to keep doing. So to then blame someone for that upsetting your pain when actually it may not have done is, yeah, a real cycle that we as healthcare professionals can get into. I want to ask Tim next up. There was a question. There's a lot of people in the audience who've signed up because somebody that they know has persistent pain. So they're not necessarily a healthcare professional, they don't necessarily have pain themselves. There was a question, what do loved ones need to know about life with persistent pain? Are you happy to share some advice on that front?
Well, yeah, I'm happy to share, but whether I don't think there's a simple answer, to be quite honest. What any loved one needs to know is that it's just going to be a bit of a difficult journey. It's going to be rocky. But I think just to put the boot on the other foot, which isn't to go back to what we were talking about a moment ago regarding blame. In no way am I trying to put the blame on me, for example, but we as pain sufferers have got to be prepared with our loved ones to be as open and honest as we can. I'm terrible. I suppose it's a bit of a bloke thing. I'm terrible at admitting when things are bad, admitting that I might need help, and so on and so forth. And I always kind of sort of expect people to second guess my needs and I don't know, come to my aid whether I ask them or not. That's the worst thing. So just to turn that the other way around, I know where I need to make the improvement. I suppose in the case of loved ones, is they've got to be aware that there is that sort of sense of anger, denial, frustration on the part of the person in the position of having persistent pain, because however you manage it, however well you can be using any of the techniques that we've talked about, it's tough and it's wearing and it's tiring. And that's going to have an impact on the way you behave and the things you can do. So I think it's a matter of having that that level of understanding and that acceptance, really, that I think is the most important thing of all.
Absolutely, no, brilliant. I'd like to bring Cormac in for a question or a set of thoughts, really. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about has been about doing the things we love doing, keeping doing the things we enjoy, not avoiding the things that we enjoy because of fear. Poppy mentioned in the chat, social prescribing, she thinks would be a really positive way of helping people with persistent pain. So prescribing, as Fen mentioned, going to a choir if you love singing, and connecting with others seems key. From a pain researcher point of view, why is that?
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Flick. First of all, doing things that you enjoy is super important. If we think about exercise as a physio background, one of the things that we always try and encourage people to do is to become physically active. Exercise is good for what ails you, but there's no one type of exercise which is particularly better than the other. And that's why what we encourage is for people to find the activity that they enjoy. And that's the one that we promote. And why do we do that? For loads of reasons. I guess it's to do with sort of adherence. If you really enjoy it, well, then you're more likely to do it. But I think there's something above that. There's the sense of joy of doing something that you enjoy beyond the physiological benefits, let's say, of exercise. There's something about the X factor of doing something you love. And just as all the speakers have said here today, pain can rob you of the opportunities to do the things you love. And you asked about sort of general musings. One of the things I've noticed from all of the talks tonight is how powerful good information has been to each of the speakers here tonight in terms of changing or flipping the way that they approach and manage their pain, and how important it is for us to help them to get access to the good information that they need. And I think that's something that I'd like to raise, which is probably sidestepping the original question a little bit. But if I've already dealt with that, I'd like to bring it back to this point of how important good education, good information is, and the duty of care we all have about making that information readily accessible to all members of society, that person with pain, but also their friends, relatives. If you're a friend or relative and you want to help your loved one, find out more. Go to the Flippin' Pain website, go to those good resources, get more information, and go on that journey as much as you can with your loved one. So yeah, that's kind of answers the question and goes off on a tangent along the way, Flick.
No, I think that was a perfect wrap up, actually. I'm really pleased you did that. But yeah, no, a really great way to wrap things up and end there. So unbelievably, it is 6:30. A few things to point you all in the direction of. So first of all, if you're thinking, well, this sounds great, where do I go next? On your screen now, you'll see various different resources. Our website is on there, flippinpain.co.uk. I did notice a couple of people had said, you know, if I want to share my story, where can I do that? Please do get in touch with us, info@flippinpain.co.uk. We want as many people as possible to be able to share their stories. Follow us on social media @flippinpain across the board. And also keep your eye out on our newsletter, so do sign up to our mailing list, which you can do on the website, for news of our future events, the biggest one being the reorganisation of the bike tour that got COVID cancelled last year. So we are planning to be out and about in September, seeing you all face to face. Unbelievable, I know, but there will be bikes, there will be interactive experiences, and there will of course be paid education. So thank you all very much for attending this evening. I've been Felicity Thou. This has been Flippin' Pain, and have a great evening.